Mr. Hamlin, please.
Bill 23 amends the 2009 general fund, the risk fund, the solid waste fund, the equipment fund, the Drexler fund, the E911 fund, and the stormwater fund by appropriating funds from the unappropriated balance for the rollover of encumbrances for the prior year commitments. And then you also have an amendment to this bill that needs to be made at the full council.
Okay. Mr. Hartzell, would you like to speak about this?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Standard practice in governmental budgeting is that there are encumbrances that are made to accounts in 2018 for which the goods have not yet been received, but we've already made the commitment to pay for those things. And so in those instances when we're going to be receiving the goods or services in the following year tied to what we've encumbered, we roll over available budget from the previous year and use that budgetary source to be able to cover over those expenses because we knew they were coming forward and we were going to owe them. So it's a standard practice budgetarily to do the rollover on an annual basis for those purposes only.
Okay, any comments from my colleagues? And the total for this 931,000 is for, just the total of the general
I
fund?
believe that's just the general fund portion.
Or just not that portion?
Yeah, the general fund portion is 931,000, which is, come on up.
Yeah. Mr. Hendricks, would you like to ask questions?
Yeah, with Mr. Hartzell.
Yes.
Just a question I have in general, is it, I don't know if the best word to use the norm, but I guess, is this normal that we have this large of an amount of money?
This is bigger than it was the last couple of years, definitely.
By how much?
Last year's general fund rollover was about 412,000. So this one's a little bit bigger. Let's
That's last year.
Yeah.
last year, let's go out and look at the chart on this one. I'm looking through the individual items, and I think several of these okay, everything that was rolling over in the equipment fund is going over to this. Right? That was showing as an 083. Should
Yeah,
that
that one should actually go into the equipment.
Ah.
So we can reduce that by
$195,000. So actually, there's one item in there that should have been in the equipment fund. The actual amount from the general fund is about $735,000. That's still significantly higher than the years before. A couple of items that were carrying forward that were from the previous year are a little bit bigger than had been the case reasonably in recent years. But the point of this is that the commitment has to be made during the year that budget gets spent on the things that we rolled the money forward for, and if it doesn't, then the budget is reversed. So we're not going to spend that budget on anything new.
So, I'm sorry, the equipment fund, you said that is gonna be, decreased from what is in here, or is in additional money, the 337,917?
Yeah, there's going to be more in the equipment fund. If you go to, there's a chart that accompanies the bill. And there is an item under EMS equipment, which I suspect probably is the litters, for the new litters for the ambulances at $195,000. That item was showing up, should have shown up in the equipment fund, and it showed up in the general fund instead. So the general fund impact is going to be more like $735,000, and then that particular item would be added to the equipment fund, which would be in the neighborhood of a little over $500,000.
Is it, I'm sorry, is it both the 93,000 and the 195,224?
That is the one. The 195,224 should have been under the equipment fund list rather than the general fund list.
Okay.
And we do have an amendment.
So, I'm sorry, so then the 931 is gonna be reduced by 195?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Lost.
And there was, and particularly that item, I want to talk on the equipment fund also. You remember that we had done the short-term loan fairly late in 2018 with the bond issue that we ran through, the $3.5 million for equipment, et cetera. And so we wanted to move those appropriations forward into 2019. So the equipment fund budget had a lot of those in it, and moving that forward, we were going to see an appropriation rollover from that fund that was a little bit larger than usual, but that's just tied to the timing of the short-term bond that we did for equipment and fleet and IT.
Plus we need to increase. There was an amendment that needs to come before you this evening. I forwarded the information to Mr. Hanlon earlier today. There are 5 last-minute purchase orders that did not get included in the original ordinance as it was drafted. There are 4 related to the equipment fund for equipment that the police department is purchasing for their IT part of the police department. And then there's also one for the city council office in the amount of $30,000 that needs to move from 2018 to 2019 for the EIP program.
Yeah, like, there you go, this, we missed him here.
There was a 4th police equipment item.
Do we know how much?
Where's the?
I just gave him the email.
50. The 5th item is actually $4,324. So you got the 3 big items up there, and then there's another equipment item for a little over $4,000 to add to that.
He's missing one item.
And that's for IT equipment as well?
For police, yes.
What are they getting? What is all this IT equipment? What are they getting?
Citywide camera, MDTs, records management system, and Nimble storage. 4 items versus purchases.
And again, this is out of the equipment fund rather than out of the general fund, so this is actually monies that are in the fund itself that are intended for that purpose, and we are merely moving the appropriation forward to be able to pay for them in 2019.
Okay.
It's the general fund that'll be the issue about the main cash, and that's where the $735,000 comes from. And just to reiterate, in that fund, when those monies are brought forward, that budget is brought forward, they can only be used for the purposes that they were brought forward for. If they are not, then those appropriations will lapse and will not be used for anything else.
They were brought forward from,
2018.
no, but what accounts were they?
There is a rather lengthy list. Do they have this one?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, all these accounts?
Yes, there you go, on the first page and the top of the second page.
Okay,
That's where they're going.
okay.
Which amount is for the citywide cameras?
Citywide cameras is 100,000.
Thank you.
Does that mean new cameras and maintenance, installation and maintenance? Is that what that is? For new cameras, installation and maintenance, or? Or is it
Since it's
just
coming out of the
maintenance?
71 account, I would say that is the purchase of new cameras, yes.
If we can eventually get, where they're gonna be placed? Because sometimes we get calls from people, from residents that want new cameras and they may be placing it that place, but you know, where they're coming from.
We can certainly have the chief know that.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments from the dais? Anything else you want to add? No. Any comments from the public on Bill 23? Mr. Hurston, take your time.
Thank you. Mr. President, could you tell me what this transfer and recycling is for $575,000?
$525,000?
Yeah, the transfer.
Third last department.
Yeah,
Solid waste.
$175,000.
That's the last payment of the year of the waste management contract.
Yes.
Third lot, 575.
Oh, $575. Yeah,
I
that's
expect that was budget authority, that was for the last payment of the year to Waste Management Services for their annual, waste disposition bill, that we needed to move that budget forward and make the payment in 2019.
What was that, Mr. Chairman? What is that?
You just.
It's the Waste Management Services contract, the main, waste collection contract.
This is solid waste fund,
Yes.
and did you say risk management?
No. You were talking about the $575,000 item, under recycling.
Yeah.
And that is actually part of solid waste. That was the waste management contract that we have for just general solid waste payment.
So in other words, you didn't budget nothing for the 2019 for that contract?
And we did. We budgeted sufficiently for the contract in 19. This was to cover the last payment of 18 that, for timing purposes, we needed to move that budget authority into January, or into the new year.
So if we have a contract, don't we divide it by 12?
Yes, and
And you
we,
didn't pay the last 2 months bill?
no, I think there was a timing issue with that I would defer to solid waste on it, but we are timely with our payments to that contract.
You said you weren't mind.
Something happened with the last payment, but we're not running late fees on that one.
I think you anticipated his comments. Thank you, Mr. Richmond. Any further comments from the public? Mr. Hunziker, I haven't seen you for a while.
Yeah,
You're hibernating in Hawaii.
something like that. Good evening, Madam Speaker. There's so much in this piece of paper, I can't digest this in 5 minutes. And we have to dig into this a little bit more. There's too many numbers here that may or may not jive. It'd be nice if you split some of this up, because some of these funds are basically almost strictly proprietary funds. And when you commingle them, I know, maybe if I was doing his job, I'd try to do the same thing, but it's our job up in the council to
Uncommingled,
yeah,
separate,
something like that, if that's such a word.
separate.
For all these, what you have listed here,
Hmm?
are there any capital projects in this?
No,
None.
these are not capitals.
So this basically, if we- and did you finish, all the encumbered money that you had in these so-called projects or whatever,
Mhm.
are they zeroed out now?
The 2018 budget, once this is completed, is completely closed out. There's nothing else that's coming over in the 2018
So if I
budget.
look at one of these and said, and added up all the streets, that would be what you had encumbered, left over at the end of the year.
That is
Am
correct.
I looking at that correctly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Like I said, I don't have time to really look into this right now, but, we do wanna get to your, capital projects, that's another issue. And there's only so much money in the treasury. So I'm trying to work with Mr. Russell and find out where this is and where it's coming from, where we're going from there, so. I don't take up any more of your time, but I guess what I keep saying, and I said this many times, is something like this should be a whole night affair with something up on the screen. We should break it down exactly, every one of these. I mean, it's a lot of work, but once you set it up and you do it on a PowerPoint or whatever, spreadsheet work, would be very good to understand this a lot easier and it'd make it, eventually it'd make it easier on everybody. I don't, if you people understand all this, you guys are the wizards, I'll tell you. You probably are.
I'm looking forward for you to decipher them and then.
Then tell
come
you
back
how
and
how
tell
it
us
is, huh?
something.
Yeah. Well, then I have to collect your.
My paycheck, right? Yeah.
Okay, well, no, we'll work on it, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elsker. Just these, in the note here, for July 1st, the encumbrance will be closed. Otherwise, it will return to the respective funds. Is that a federal, I mean, is that our rules, or where does that come from?
That is something, that's not necessarily a rule per se that it exists in terms of ordinance. It is, I think, a good practice to have that if you're going to bring money forward for a definite expense, you ought to get it spent in the first 6 months of the year. And if you don't do that, then that budget doesn't have a purpose in being brought forward because you should have dealt with an encumbrance that quickly. So that's a standard rule that I try to abide by, to say that if you haven't got it spent at that point, you're not going to. And so the budget lapses, and if you're going to, at that point, try to still buy that particular product, unless a very rare exception, very rare exception, other than that, you're gonna have to pay out of your current year budget for it.
Okay, so that's kind of like your internal rules.
That's
you want to make sure
internal.
that they are, they are encumbrance side of it.
There is a time limit intended on that to say, you get this thing spent.
Okay. Thank you very much. All right, now for the question from the public, I'd like to hear a motion that we do something with it. Colleague, Mr. Hendricks, Mr. Moulton,
I make a motion that we move this to the full council.
I second.
I'm sorry, you want favorably, unfavorably?
With a favorable recommendation.
Okay.
I will second.
All in favor, please respond by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. All right, let's move forward to the budget and finance for and we're gonna look at the, you wanna do the December first, or you wanna do the February first? Which one is better for you?
Let's do 3rd December, because that one will go pretty quickly, and just as a wrap up of where we're at in terms of cash. As we head now into the CAFR process and the audit, that will be able to calculate where our overall net position is by the end of June, of where we're at the end of 2018 with respect to our available fund balance in the general fund and other things.
Okay, and that's for the public. What we'll do basically is at the end of the year, we do December, from the prior year, so we do 1, 2, and 3. This is the third one.
That is
Okay?
correct.
This is the last one. And then
Yep.
from there on, we usually do right around this time in March, with little late, but, we still, today's what, the 3rd?
Yes.
Okay, but, so, go ahead.
The final numbers for cash that we have as we're now heading into the CAFR process, I look to page 2 on the December report, and that shows general fund revenue at $108,846,000. That is down near the bottom right on page 2, so 108.84. At the bottom right of the next page, number 3, is showing general fund expenditures of $106,115,000. So the revenues for cash purposes, for actual cash coming in and going out the door in the general fund, revenues exceeded expenditures by $2.7 million. Nice place to be at the end of the year, considering that we were budgeting a deficit at the start of the year. And so I would expect that when the CAFR is released in late June, that we will see an overall improvement in our fund balance in the general fund compared to what was showing in the CAFR at the end of 2017.
Good.
If I may.
Good.
Mr. Hartzell, if you know, what do you, what was the reason for the surplus to 2.7? What do you think was the single most?
Thank you, Councilman Hendricks. On the expenditure side, I think there was a very close caution on expenditures late in the year in which people did not spend to a large amount near the end of the year. I think we saw some real containment of costs in the latter part of the year. But I think the bigger thing that moved this was on the revenue side. Taxes came in a little bit above what we had projected, but roughly within like 1% of what we had projected there. But we had a much better year in intergovernmental grants. We had a significantly better year in inspection revenue that came in. And I think those particular items were what really drove that revenue increase, and that we came in significantly above what we had projected on revenue, and then combined with the constraints on expenditures, we were able to come in far better than a $3.5 million deficit that we had originally aimed for.
So lessons learned going forward. And I believe
Yes.
some of those fees were increased mid-year, if I'm not mistaken. So hopefully that bears fruit going forward.
That is the intention.
Thank you.
And everything else that is in all the other funds, we have already talked about on previous times that we have spoken about the December numbers. I don't think there are any real significant changes anywhere else in the final December report. If I go to page 11, I can show you the cash balances of the pooled accounts and the non-pooled accounts at the end of December. With the exception of the golf fund, every one of the other accounts was in a positive balance. And that's where we want to show things. That's where we want to be. And the general fund, I'm going to get into this in the February statement, but I think you're going to see as a comparison, I want you to take a look on page 11 of the December at January and February up at the very top where you see 000, the general fund, that those are the balances beyond the stabilization fund that we had available to us in cash. At the end of January in 18, we were at about $2.2 million and then at about 4.3 million at the end of February. When you see the reports that are going to be coming up with respect to 2019 in the same months, they're going to look considerably better. And we'll get to that when we get to the February report. So keep that one close to hand. I don't really have anything else to raise on the December because we've talked about that in some, to a significant degree on previous occasions.
Yep. Any comments, any further comments from the dais in the December 3rd? We've been talking about this all along, so, but if you have any comments, let me know. Let's move on to the February. Yeah, it's only 2 months, but doing pretty good actually. We talked a little bit about the business privilege, which was,
If I may, Mr. Grady, the last year, the escrow payment to the neighborhood improvement zone out of the business privilege tax happened later in the year in October. And you can see that on the December report that we had a significant negative revenue in that category in October. This year, we completed the escrow in the month of February, and so that negative amount that you see for business privilege tax in February is already taken into account the escrow. We will not have another reduction like that for the remainder of the year, and we should expect over the next, during the months of March and April, to see a significant collection on that tax.
that's in first page, line 2909.
Correct.
Second page, state pension. There was a casino fee, we talked about the expectations, a little bit the day before. Can you talk a little bit about
I
that?
do. The end of fourth quarter payment for the casino fee, this is the category 6195 on the second page, came in at $928,000. That is significantly less than what we usually see as a fourth quarter payment from the Department of Revenue for gaming purposes. I have a call in with those folks to find out what may be driving that, and I will get an answer for you on that as quickly as possible. Because I'm not sure, I think there was a different calculation done with respect to the slot machine revenue, and that is showing some significant change, so I need to get some clarity on that one, and I'll bring that back to you as quickly as I can.
Thank you.
If I may, along with that, with the recent sale of the Sands to the new entity, any changes there expected as far as their commitment and payment?
I don't expect, Councilman Hendricks, that there will be any changes in terms of the commitments. The issue that will drive what we get in revenue is going to be entirely how much actual gaming takes place on the facility, because it's, the revenues that we get from the casino fee are raised as a percentage of actual table revenue and slot machine revenue that is generated. So if they can continue to generate the same kind of revenue there that they've been doing heretofore, then we should see a pretty constant revenue amount going forward from what we've expected.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. If not, let's move on the, page 3, let's see page 2, I didn't see anything else on page 2 that I was concerned about. Page 3, continuation, and I didn't see anything there either. Well, it's kind of early to see any much of difference, but,
And I would note also, Mr. Green, to say that the main change from where we were at in expenditures the same time a year ago is that we have done more of our budgeted interfund transfers earlier in the year than we did last year. The overall operational expenditures are pretty much constant or with a slight increase in the personnel area, which would be expected.
yeah, we talked about that as well. So, the Drexler Fund, there's not much there yet.
We are caught up on our revenues that we were expecting from the Drexler Fund, and we continue to work very closely with them. Their fiscal year actually just started this week. We will be finding out probably in a matter of weeks what our distribution will be for from Drexler for the 12-month period beginning April 1st. We have budgeted accordingly that we think we're in a pretty good, we made a pretty good estimation on what that revenue will be. When we get the actual amount, we will let you know.
Okay. Thank you. And that's on a reimbursement basis, right?
Yes, sir.
The Briggs Fund, we're taking a good look at account line 37, regards to the insurance.
Yes, that is the particular item. It was talked about in some rather important detail at the end of the year that we dealt with that overage in the over the budget of what we had for health insurance. We're watching that one very carefully this year, and if there is anything to this point, the trends are not that we're going to be shooting over budget, but if there is something that clearly shows that we're going to go ahead of budget at some point, we will bring immediately a budget amendment for your consideration to bring that happen. We're not going to wait and see. We're going to get this thing done right away. I would point out also in the revenue side of risk fund in account 6615, you can see that in the month of February, we received a considerable amount of return from our stop loss insurance because of the one very expensive case that we had during the year. So we took in almost $1.3 million in that went back into the balance of the risk management fund that goes into their reserves.
Okay. Shows a difference there. Thank you. The solid waste fund. A little bit lower than last year.
My expectation is that we saw a whole lot of, you're gonna see in the March report that real estate taxes came in to a huge degree, and along with that are going to be the solid waste fees and the stormwater fees, because they're on the same bill. So I would expect you will see a very normal pattern emerging by the end of March on that and on the stormwater fee.
Well, the March report, we should see a little bit difference there. Anything else on that one? If not, let's move on to stormwater fund. And we're a little bit higher this year than last year this time.
Some of that is actually a collection of stormwater fees from the prior year that we're only collecting right now. I would expect that's in the revenue line 3631, 3630 is coming in a little bit slower a pace than the year ago, but again, this is tied to the real estate taxes. So once those taxes come in to a significant degree, which they have done in March, you will see a significant boost in the revenue in line 3630 in March.
Same thing. All right, let's move forward to the golf fund. Not much golf in yet. Hopefully, we see a little increase. March was not too bad, so hopefully we can see.
The scuttlebutt anyway appears that with the weather having gotten a bit nicer in March, that it's been a little bit busier out there. We'll find out when we look to see what the March revenue comes in on, but I think it will be, the numbers for revenue in March will be good on that one.
Thank you, and next will be the 9/11 fund, and we have until August, you know.
Right, we saw the fourth quarter revenue for the 911 fund come in the month of February. We will have 2 more quarterly payments coming for the first and second quarters of 2019. And after that point, the transfer of the emergency dispatch services will be complete. And we've already, of course, moved the dispatchers, transferred them over to Lehigh County, but there are still expenses and projects related to 911 that we will continue to utilize that fund for the first half to 2/3 of the year, and then those distributions in the future will go to Lehigh County.
Did they, go through all the employees here, but I saw they were looking to hire more people. Are they full staff?
If the county is doing that, that is certainly up to them. We completed that transfer at the end of January. So they're no longer city employees.
So let's move forward to some of the general fund personnel expenditure. And that will be for premium pay, for some of these wages and premium pays for some of the shifts. We are a little higher than last year. Regards to premium pay. My department, so you can look at it, it's not that much, but it's still higher. And on page 11, 13, we have the page 11, we have the pool and non-pool.
And it is here, Mr. Greedy, if I may, that I would like to point out and have you open up the same page in the December report for comparison's sake. You will note that at the end of January a year ago, the cash on hand in the general fund beyond that of the stabilization fund came in at $2,174,000. At the end of January of 2019, looking on the February report, you can see that number is $3.5 million higher. And you can see the same transition from February of a year ago at 4.3 million to 8.1 million end of February this year. So our cash reserve is $3.8 million higher at the same time a year ago, same time of the year as compared to a year ago.
Good.
On that, January would reflect the 2.7 million that we increased revenue from last year.
Oh, absolutely, yes, that number would have, you would see that is affecting both January and February,
Well,
yes.
February seems like we're even ahead of that by maybe another 2 million.
We are in a very good place at this point, and it's going to be up to us just to continue to do that and continue to stabilize finances appropriately.
Any comments on this? Any other comments? If not, let's move forward to vacancy report. And I see a lot of 100% here. We still have like 50 and 30 and 20%, 70% of works. And
So far for the year in the general fund, we had forecast a $2.1 million vacancy factor. We are certainly on pace for that. We're just over 400,000 2 months into the year. But obviously, that number will not increase that at the same pace as we hire more positions.
Okay, further comment from the dais? If not, any comments from the public in regards to the December 3 and February report, budget and finance report?
Go ahead, Mr. Kerr, South Allentown. Is there a reason why we don't show the 2018 on the page 11? Why don't we show those bonds? You had $3.5 million, you took a bond out, is that correct? And we talk about all these that were so good, we just took $3.5 million, don't forget, and he's saying he has $2 million left over. So, okay.
Sorry, Mr. Ross.
I can answer. Let's go back to the December report if we may. Go to page 2 of the December. And you look down at revenue item 7110 near the bottom of the page. I'll wait until everybody's gotten a look at that spot. Yes, 2018 bond proceeds. You will see that in the month of November, we took in $3,541,000 in proceeds that went immediately into the general fund. You will then see in December that all but $6,000 of that was shifted out of the general fund, went into the equipment fund and the capital fund. And the numbers that we've talked about this on a previous occasion, that the revenue increases that were in the capital fund and the equipment fund in the month of December last year are conditioned based upon that transfer of funds. So when we're talking about the increased cash balances that we have now, you can see that we netted out of the general fund and everything dealing with the bond proceeds, and those are not factored into our current balances at all.
I'd recommend next time, Mr. Hamlin's, separate these in two separate things, so you can get to them. But anyway, that's no big deal, but I'll take his word that this, you took this 3.5 million and you inserted it into December. But if I go back and look at the NATO's report in those months, page 11, I don't think it was ever shown that you took that money in down here in those sections, in unpooled bank statements. I don't remember seeing that. Am I mistaken?
If I go to page 11 on the December report,
Yeah.
let's take a look at the difference between November and December in Fund 001, the capital fund near the top. At the end of November, there was a positive balance in there of $184,000. At the end of December, it was $1 million higher. So you can see transfers were made into that fund at that point. I go down a little bit further to the equipment fund, Fund 83, and you can see that there was $719,000 that was in that fund in the end of November, and by the end of December, that had gone up to, I believe, $1,804,000, if I am reading things correctly. And there were expenses that were coming out of both of those funds during the course of the year, so the net increase in those two funds makes pretty clear that we had shifted that money over into those funds in December.
I guess what I'm saying is there should have been, when you brought that money in, there should have been a line item saying that that bond money was here. I mean, for me to find this up here in my time zero, which it always is, but to find this thing, I'll have to talk to you later about this because we mentioned it to Mr. Hartzell before. There should be, if you're getting bonds in here, the same thing with 2019. You have a 2019 bond, that you got the money? This one here, this February one?
I can speak to that if you wish. Those bonds have been, are going out for sale tomorrow, and we're hoping that they will be, as the terminology is oversubscribed. Apparently the market for them appears to be very solid at this point, and the interest rate situation has improved considerably compared to last autumn, where we had talked about getting a savings on our debt service in the neighborhood of $790,000. I have early projections are it's going to be even better than that, but I'm going to hold off on using an exact number until the sale actually happens tomorrow. The bonds did maintain our A rating, which was our standard rating, what we have, along with the negative outlook that we've had since last fall. But I think given the maintaining that rating and with what appears to be some interest in the bonds, that it will be a very successful sale tomorrow, and we will and see some significant debt service savings out of it, particularly the remainder of this year and in 2020.
When will we see the reflection into the report of that series of bonds?
I would probably say the April report will show those proceeds coming in.
So by the third week of May, I would see this?
Yes.
The other question back on page 11 was the risk management. You said there's an increase. Where did that money come from? You said you got paid back from some insurance company? Or?
Yes, when we talked a couple months ago about the increase in health insurance costs, we had a single case that was very, very expensive, and our stop-loss insurance gives us a rebate on any costs for a single case that exceeds $250,000. So in that particular case, that stop-loss payment coming back from the insurer was the amount above $250,000 that we were rebated because we had the insurance in place.
You're talking about a $2 million. What?
$1,300,000 that would have been.
I'm looking between January and February.
Mm-hmm.
The difference on that. Can I find that somewhere, that that money came back? Should we look at the actual cash coming into the?
I actually held the check at one point when it came in, but we can certainly show the records on that for you.
Are you talking about $250,000? I mean, okay, that's one, but that's far.
That's the
far
cap
away
that
from
the city ends up paying on any one case. That is our out of pocket. Anything that goes beyond $250,000, the city will be reimbursed by the insurer beyond that point.
But I'm looking at it, this was an increase in this reserve of money, right, that's coming in. So it went from, if I look, I don't know, maybe I'm looking at this wrong, but risk management was 1.072 million.
Yes.
In January, now it's 3.560 million. And I'm looking at the difference there, so we should have had either less payments or something, or how did we get this extra money there? You're saying we got insurance back, but then you only talked about a $250,000 number.
Oh, let me clarify. No, the 250 is what the city is responsible for, thank you, on any particular case. If a particular case were to say be $1 million, the city would foot the bill for 250,000 of that permanently. We would be actually paying out the entirety of that bill at the time the expenses were due, but we would then get a rebate from that million all the way back to the 250 to cover the stop-loss insurance. So we would, in that case, get 750,000 of that back to us. And we had a case similar, actually even a little bigger than that, that brought us back some significant funds in the neighborhood of $1.2 million in insurance revenue in February.
You didn't get $2,500,000 back in insurance money,
No, about half that.
but there's a difference you're showing. This is what you're showing. You're saying in this month of February, if I look at this, you're saying you have account, according to the risk management, you have 3.5, say 3.5 million. Is that right?
That came in the door for revenue that month? Yes.
It came somewhere, but
Yes,
you're tying it into risk management fund.
that is correct.
And you have a listing of where, how that happened
Yes,
between January and February.
yes. Yes, the two major items would have been the transfer, the monthly transfer from the general fund that is already included as part of the general fund insurance budget. And also the stop-loss payments that came in during the month of
So the
February.
monthly transfer, is that fixed that you normally do, or
Yes, sir.
and roughly how much is it?
As you can see in that particular item there, it comes out to about 1.9 million a month, or 1.7 million a month. Get that number wrong.
So basically in January, you're saying that 1.07 number is normally the monthly transfer
That-
to the general?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that helps explain something. Okay, there's other things on here, but we'll get to it later. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Earl. Let's go.
Thank you, Mr. Gritty. I'll ask you one question. You have so much money, you said, should we have heat? I mean, it's a real. Money here, somebody's not paying the bill, it's cold in here. And number two
It's
is.
better to have money than not to.
Well, then, my next question, you keep saying everything goes good financially, you should have cut my taxes for 2019.
I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with
I
you.
mean, my God, everything looks so good, and then I hear Mr. Hartz will say it looks good, and when I look at this 2019 report, expenditures exceed revenue, but it shows we have more revenue in February than January. How does that happen if we're paying more bills and never taking in,
You got more
Mr.
revenue.
If I may, to that one, the deficit, if we're looking at the general fund, on pages 2 and 3, you will see at the end of January that we had quite a bit more expenses than we had revenues coming in the door in the month of January, but then in the month of February, that began to switch over, in which revenues exceeded expenditures that month, which is now, and it's going to continue that way as the tax money comes into the city through March, April, and May.
You see a better report in March.
When I look at this report, I think that the expenditure for January and February, taking 2 months to exceed the revenue for January and February. And when I look at the report, wrong, it's hard or that's a right report. You take the January and February revenue and you take the January and February expenditure. Expenditures seem to exceed revenue.
As I had pointed out, the position at the end of January was even further, that the expenditures were even further beyond revenues at that point. And that during the month of February, you can see that revenues exceeded expenditures in the general fund that month, and so that earlier gap shrunk considerably. We're still at a point where at the end of February, the overall expenditures are exceeding the revenues, although part of that is also being driven by revenue transfers that we would have made to the risk fund and others. But in February, we clearly closed an earlier gap that was much bigger.
It has nothing to do with the transfer of monies, and if you just talk about it, just $4 to $9 million you transferred into general fund from 2018, it has nothing to do with the cash balance, does it? You transferred $981 million, is a bill number, whatever that bill number was. Does that have anything to do with the cash balance?
That does not, no, that would not have anything to do with the cash
But the
balance,
cash
obviously.
balance, but that money you really don't have, because you paid that 981, that money's encumbered out of that 81.
Well, when we spend that money later on in the spring, yes, it'll show up in the cash balances as an expenditure made.
But really, it should be encumbered money, right, for 2019?
It is encumbered and brought into this current year, and for cash purposes, once we spend it, which is, it's gonna happen pretty soon, you will see it on the reports as an expenditure for cash.
You didn't have money, don't you encumber, when you have a bill, don't you encumber the money? You have a bill, I mean, that should be past practice here, once there's an invoice, there's an encumbrance.
Absolutely, there's no disagreement for me on that one. The funds are encumbered, but they haven't been spent yet. They're committed to that purpose as in to be spent.
In other words, the $981 is encumbered money.
That is money, we now have the authority in place to spend that money.
You have authority to spend, but it's encumbered, you also encumbered it.
That is correct.
So in other words, if you would take that 8 million, that 8 million, 980 million, if you would take the bills, say,
I think I see his point. Yes, that number would, with those expenditures, reduce the cash balance.
one other
Yes,
question, Mr. Green.
yes, I get
2019
it.
budget is printed, ready to be purchased.
You're right.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it is. So we can work out the same arrangement that we normally do with him, Mr. Hirschman, in terms of the budget, the detail book, if you want.
Yeah, there is a discount.
I'm looking for it too.
Well, it's been online actually for about a month, the online version of it, but we do have the books, and I believe it would be very easy to come up with an extra copy or two for Mr. Hirschman.
Thank you, Mr. Hartzell. Any further comments from the board, from the public? That, Mr. Joe. Thank you. So there's a meeting at 6:15 for human resources.
Thank you.
We're gonna start the Human Resource Committee is going to come to order. We have a bill tonight. Mr. Hanlon, all of the committee is here, Ms. Moda and Ms. Zukel, and also Mr. Hendricks, Mr. Greedy. Everybody's here. Mr. Robinson and the President. Okay, so could you read the bill for us, please?
Bill 13 amends the risk fund budget by transferring $218,812.70 to cover legal fees and negative balance in permanent wages and self-insured losses.
All right, Melanie, would you like to give us a quick synopsis of this bill?
So these were, so the. Yeah, it is.
Take this.
Okay, yeah, this one's working, okay. So this is, this bill is designed to, this bill is set up to transfer money to cover shortages from 2018. It will, it's coming from the unappropriated funds, and then also, to cover those shortages. So we were short here under permanent wages, self-insured losses, professional service fees, and also the medical. And this is transferring money so that those shortages will be covered.
Any questions from my colleagues, from the committee, on this transfer? Seeing none, anyone from the dais here?
Just a quick question. There's been a lot of legal fees because every time almost every week I open the paper that somebody is suing somebody or somebody is suing us, and I wanted to see if there's a way we can get the total amount of how much you're actually spending on legal fees and how we're gonna be able to pay for all these legal fees.
It is hard sometimes to predict how much it will be, because there are so many cases that are open, but we're actually starting a process of predictive analysis where we're working closely with the finance department. We have a shared resource that is doing some predictive analysis with us. We're working alongside the solicitor's office as well to get a better handle on what we can predict in the future. And as soon as we have that process identified, we'll be able to be a lot more closer to being able to predict. We'll have a better handle on what's coming down the pike.
So when would I be able to see that? When can you predict that we're gonna be able to get it?
Great question. So, it'll take us at least a month. We've just started pulling the process together, and looking at how do we do those analytics and working closer with the solicitor's office. So, let's say June. I'm sorry.
That's a couple of months, but.
It's a couple months. We're working with the solicitor's office as well as finance. And right now, we don't have a predictive analysis process, so it's creating a process from scratch.
Okay.
I was gonna say, the solicitor's office is in the process of setting up a meeting with you guys.
Okay.
Yes, that would be good, because, Mr. Hirschman thinks we have a lot of money, but we don't have that much money. So I wanna make sure that we're not spending that much in money that we may not be able to recover from anywhere.
You know, if you need the information before that, we can provide you with summaries of where we are without the predictive analysis and give you an estimate of what we think.
That'd be
where we
good,
think.
that'd be good, thank you.
What would you like that by?
Well, as soon as you can get it. I mean, no, raw, it shouldn't be.
June.
June, so you mean, we're gonna get it in the Crawford reports probably, with the Crawford reports.
Yeah, Ms. Moda.
If the prediction, has to do with perhaps, maybe more training, do you think that you're gonna have some pushback for preventive, like measures, you know? Like, perhaps, getting more training to prevent, maybe incidents from, happening? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I believe a lot of that training, as you see these things happen, that the different departments are training people where there may be areas that create a risk, and that's what the risk manager looks at.
And we have the risk management team does have a training plan that is in place that is gonna be implemented, but it is based on what they're seeing to prevent, so they can prevent.
Okay, thank you.
Some of it is internal. Some of it is just how do we manage ourselves better internally, and then some of it is responding to preventing incidents that cost money.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Moda. Mr. Robinson?
Yes, no, this is just more of a suggestion for the administration. If we can also, Mr. McMahon, when we have that, meeting with the solicitor's office with the description of the lawsuits, have, a detailed breakdown of what lawsuits qualify under funding from the solicitor's office and what lawsuits qualify for having funding, under risk, and also, how those are categorized. So when a potential lawsuit comes along, how is the determination made as to which fund, either the general fund or the risk management fund, will pay the legal fees for that lawsuit? Just so we have a clear indication as to all the decision-making powers and how it works out. Because I think that would help us long-term with working with you guys for determining the best funding amounts moving forward for those two funds as well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I apologize for. Any other comments? Anybody on guys? Mr. Herschel?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. My question is, 2018, number one, I think the charter, which Mr. Robinson's familiar with, reads that any money that has been spent and that's in an appropriate balance, state cannot be spent no longer. It's rolled over to 2019. So in other words, this money at $2 million some dollars should not be available according to the charter. But the only way it should be made available is what Mr. Hartson did today, had the money encumbered, and then you roll it over, like Mr. Hartson did today. You roll over expenditures state or risk management fund.
Did you say $2 million?
No, no, 218,000, I'm sorry.
Oh, I thought you said, I'm sorry, okay.
Right, that's your baby slipped.
I'm thinking. Mr. Hartman?
I can speak to that. Mr. Hirschman raises a very astute point, but these were actual services that were provided to the city during 2018. These weren't ones that we were waiting on happening in 2019. These were legal fees that accumulated. You will recall the initial budget that we had in this item, I believe, was $300,000, which was far too low. You added an appropriation of $600,000 later on in the year to bring us up to $900,000, and we were anticipating, hoping, of course, that that was going to be sufficient to cover over the legal expenses for the year. It turned out that it was a bit more than that. And as we're going to be anticipating this one as carefully as we are healthcare expenses going forward for the next year, so that this is being dealt with on an ongoing basis rather than trying to correct it at the end of the year. But in this instance, these were all legal expenses that were actually incurred during 2018, and we are right now trying to fix the budget on this to close out 2018 appropriately. And there are sufficient funds as of the reserves in the risk management fund at the end of 2018 to cover over this appropriation.
So that budget ended up gonna be $30 or $35 for it might not be correct maybe when it comes to local fund balance and the risk management fund, am I correct?
I will say on that one that what is estimated in there as far as the budget goes may very well be different, yes.
So I might be wrong, but so look at corrected page, so we have corrected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hirschman. Sounds good.
One minute, sir. This amount of money, what's the cutoff date? Is this up to the 1st of April, or?
These expenses were not any later than December 31st of 2018.
So we're gonna have, how many more Bill 13s are we gonna have this year?
This is the last one.
How about 26 or Bill 26? I mean, are we gonna duplicate this every?
That's why we're going to anticipate in future, both with healthcare and with legal costs, that if we see trends that are clearly going to be outside or beyond what the budget has provided for it, we're gonna bring these things to you post haste and make sure we get this covered, and we're gonna do it in a proactive and appropriate fashion.
So when you generated this number, you must already have a slope on proactively projecting where you're gonna be in June. So we should present that to council so we can see where we are within the next 30 days or so. I mean, you already have that probably. You know what.
I'm looking at the spend rate constantly.
So you already know that.
Mhm.
Somebody should have been doing that, but.
It will be done from here on. It'll be done here on.
So, Mr. Chairman, or so we have to put a note to say in the 1st of May, we should see some trends, lines. Okay?
Let's work on that.
Help us all. See what our tax bill is gonna be for next year. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else from the public who'd like to speak on Bill 13? Seeing none, could I have a motion to move this to favorably to the full body council?
I would like to make a motion to move this favorably in front of full council.
Do I have a second? Second by Mr. Zuppel. All right, we so moved to the full body council. This meeting is adjourned.